Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Whatever which time you're watching this, welcome everyone back to the Bible Recap discussion. We are in week 9, where we are thoroughly into the book of Numbers and a chapter from the book of Psalms, Psalm 90. I forgot to announce that last week because I was reading, I was like, I forgot to mention that.
Anyways, I forgot it until today too, so I ended up flipping through and giving it a quick read. So
if you're following along with us on Facebook or whatnot, and you're going by off what we share with you, I apologize, and go check it out. And we're going to see Psalms. Actually, I look forward, kind of weaved in and out. So I'll try to be better about that on when I post the next week's assignment on Facebook. All right. Well, like I said, we're here in Numbers, chapter 7 to 22, and Tyler's going to kick us off with the questions tonight, or today.
How is the people's grumbling to each other about their circumstances different from Moses complaining to God about the people? So I'm going to run right into this. I thought they were complaining more about God and Moses versus Moses was more complaining about their loss of faith in God. So kind of quick. There wasn't a better way for me to say it than what I had written down. So,
say yours again.
I had that that the people were more complaining about Moses and God, but Moses was more complaining about the people's faith in God.
Okay. It's kind of the good old. They were just complaining about God behind God's back. I mean, it was just the old junior high.
Yeah.
And then I think for me, Moses going to God was more of a kind of help me out here. I'm doing the best I can. What do you want me to do with these people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was. I guess I really didn't see his as complaining.
Yeah.
But the other was just backstabbing, normal.
Well, and she states it in here that the folks tend to glamorize the past. Like at one point, of course, later, I think during the Korah, they referred to their time in Egypt as a land flowing with milk and honey. And I think for most of us, like, wait, what? What did you just say?
You were miserable there.
What just came out of your mouth?
Yeah. You were a slave.
Don't you remember what was going on? And so I think it definitely shows people lack of faith because in several of the encounters, it complained about the food, the comfort. They didn't have the buffet right now, even though, Moses, kept telling them, we're going to a land of milk and honey. There is a future that is greater than what we had. And the fact that so much for them is going to be set up in the new promised land that, but I think, again, before I get too far on that, how easy it is for us to look back at the good old days. And I know for many people, the good old days, they think of like a 1950s style. And it's like, man, you think of all the
sitcom
diseases
style,
they had to worry about. And think about
polio.
Polio. The good old days where, you can just walk down the street and catch polio. But I think it's so easy to look back and see only the good stuff. See only the fact that they had cucumbers and food and meat and whatnot, and they totally forget about the slavery. Because if you thought back to the good old days, to the 1940s, well, there was World War II and and all that fun stuff. And so I think for us today, the danger of glamorizing our past or even glamorizing things. Because even going back later to when, after the people complained, God sends the snakes and they get the they get the serpent. And of course, she kind of gives a spoiler that they end up destroying it later because people are worshiping it. Yeah. And so I think that's just for us to realize that in this grumbling with Moses and complaining about Moses, Aaron, and God, it's just sometimes people have a myopic view on their situation.
What you reminded me, I recently watched God Is Not Dead, the first one, where the student has to prove to the atheist professor that God is not dead or he F's the class. And one of the things in there that kind of reminds me of this was more of people living in present day. I think we have two things that we worship, and it's money and it's attention by social media. And that was one thing in there that kind of, there was a guy who his mom was dying. His sister was married or dating the pastor, or not the pastor, I'm sorry, the professor. But only thing he was worried about was me, myself, and how I look. Do I look like I have money? And that's one thing I think we'll talk about later in here too with money. But money is kind of that thing for us now that we really focus on and idolize. Also on that note though too, you said something else and I was like, yeah, that, but now I don't remember. So I don't, all right.
It's all good.
You're so old.
Yeah.
We'll probably come back to it.
Okay.
I guess
We got
old
some
enough. Yeah.
repeating
It'll
stuff
come
here.
back. So
Number 2, then. It's likely that Miriam and Aaron are some of the people whom God speaks through in Numbers 11:25. How might that have contributed in their arrogance in 12:2?
with this, to me, this was more of it's a human thing. Everyone inflates their ego and it'll slowly get bigger and bigger until the point of, I deserve that. I deserve this. I always go to basketball. There's always, there's only 5 guys out there. And I was on a team my senior year of 13 guys. We had 7 seniors. And I had a kid behind. I didn't play a whole lot my senior year. I had a kid behind me I thought was better. And that was playing just as much as I was. But like, I couldn't see past my own inflated arrogance that I was better than him. I should be getting his minutes. And that's what I kept putting this back to, was Aaron wanted his time, or I think more of also Miriam wanted this time for Aaron to push him up, to pull her with him. So that was kind of the more of the arrogance I took from it, was not being not being godly, and more of selfly, I guess is the best way I could put that. So I think that was the best way I could explain that part of it.
I agree. I mean, I just kind of simply said, well, of course, when the 70 were picked, I mean, that does flatter you. And so then you think, oh, okay, I'm more than, and I kind of looked at it in the Bible as he was just helping Moses out, basically at Moses's request. And it was kind of a one-time deal. But then that does make you think, well, if I can do it once, then why can't I do it all the time? Why can't I be glorified like
And I was also
they were
thinking,
looking at Moses? So
with Aaron too, he's been picked as the high priest, so why isn't he the one speaking to God? Why is Moses? Like, I'm sure that bit into that as well. Like, I have the title and the clothes and why is Moses able to come in here? Why is he the one talking directly to him? So, and I think that adds into that arrogance. So,
yeah, I think the only thing I would add too is that, of course, in this time of the culture and an honor shame society, you either were moving up in status or going down in status. And so I think it was just a cultural understanding that you want to move up.
Yeah.
And so just, for us, as sometimes, commercials today on TV wants to buy something that helps ingrain a consumeristic mindset, even though we know that's not good for us emotionally, mentally, or for our pocketbooks.
Yeah.
And so I think for them, that could probably have been an underlying part of it, because that's what they were familiar with. That's what they grew up into before they were brought out of Egypt. So that's the only thing I've got to add.
yeah, we hit all
like
the.
You guys
they
hit
don't
it.
ever learn their lesson. I mean,
Yeah.
the rest of this is just like, you're never going to see the promised land. I mean, you screwed up.
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't you? They kind of can see what's been happening, but they don't. I mean, I understand that they never do quite get there, but I'm just like, I think I would be going, I'll do whatever you ask me to do whenever you ask me to do it.
And that's where I appreciate the honesty of the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where, of course, on Sunday morning, you know, when Israel screws up over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Makes me feel a lot better about what I've done, I guess. So.
Let's see here. Number 3. If we consider the ancient Jewish view that the Nephilim from Genesis 6 were destroyed in the flood, how is it possible that they could be living in Canaan when the spies arrived? I thought this was a good question. I actually did some extra digging, but go ahead.
More of, even like today, I hate to bring this up, but you get Bigfoot brought up. Like, oh, I've seen Bigfoot. Like, I think it's almost one of those myths. Like, yes, it was true that anyone that seemed over, you know, I'm an over average person in height and size. And some of the stuff I've read into David and Goliath would have been my size or a little bit taller at 6'7". You know, David, if I remember correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was like 5'2" to 5'6" ish is what they were.
It was a shorty, especially at that age.
Yeah. So, you know, a foot taller, you know, you would be seen as a giant, you know, and I think that's kind of anyone over, they were thought as Nephilim because they didn't understand, like, sometimes you just grow taller than everyone else. Like, and that's kind of more of what I've, from kind of reading the few things, it was kind of more of a cultural thing. Like, hey, I seen that's got to be a Nephilim, not, he might just be a regular person. And also you're talking about, also one thing that kept coming into my mind with this was some of these people already wanted to go back to Egypt. So what was going to, you know, first thing you think of when you try to scare someone is give them the worst possible thing in front of them.
That she talked about.
Yeah. So
she gave, I mean, I just kind of went right to her 3 theories and they all made sense to me. But that last one was, since the 10 spies who doubt are so afraid, they're likely exaggerating to scare the people out of taking them. Yeah.
That was a lot easier way of trying to say what I was saying. But yeah, that's, I don't know. We always try to, it's always worse in our brains, especially the more you think about it. And if only few people have seen it, you know, it's human psychology. So I can't blame them, but that's why.
Well, they spent about 30 to 40 days there. And if, you know, if you keep freaking yourself out and you're left to your own devices in your own mind for over a month, of course, by the time you get folks like, this is going to be terrible.
Well, I can only imagine hearing a noise in the house and just laying in bed, you know, that.
Well, and it's so easy especially when people have that mindset that they catastrophize things in their mind. Worst case scenario every time, even though after seeing what God has done over and over and over and over. So my research, total pivot.
Yeah.
As I watched actually a full lecture by an apologist on the Nephilim, and the typical understanding is that, you know, that they were the result of fallen angelic beings mating with women. But he points to, in the context of the scripture, the immediate context and surrounding context, and some of the cultural context, is that actually they weren't, and the sons of God were not angelic creatures, but they were actually just the kings who were perpetuating the growing problems that were already highlighted. So, for example, when it talks about the sons of God mating with the daughters of man, sons of God was a common title for kings in the ancient world. And he points out to the rhythm, what we start seeing right away in Genesis, that there was an increase in pride, increase of violence, and then polygamy. And then what we see here is actually what is described on a singular scale a chapter or two beforehand, now we see as a cultural scale, the increase of pride, violence, and polygamy. It really made me think a lot. Like, there was a lot of credibility, I think, to that explanation, especially when it comes to the themes of Scripture and looking at some of the context. But either way, I think what she highlights in the book is great, because if Nephilim are really of men who wanted to make a name for themselves And then you have this inflated image in your mind. Of course, they're going to freak themselves out, especially when you feel like an underdog.
Yeah, to begin with.
Yeah.
Which is, so your research, I mean, who'd you say it was?
So the lecture I watched, it's his YouTube page is Inspiring Philosophy. You want to go check him out. His name is Michael Jones, and he's about our age. So.
Cool.
So that would kind of, to me, go with number 2 then. The legend of the Nephilim is carried down through generations and has become a term they use to refer to any particularly large people. Yeah. So a large group
people
of,
and a violent people who, whether it's for war or some type of skill set.
Mm-hmm. All right. Are we ready for number 4? Number 4, looking back over the past few books, describe the trajectory of the Israelites' attitude since they came into the wilderness. What traits have you seen them display? Looking like the stock market. So, which I think every one of these, I've tried to put myself in their shoes. And I can't say I probably want to be whining and complaining.
Probably, given the circumstances.
But it's 110 degrees every day.
Yeah. Eat manna, all that good stuff. But I was trying to give him some grace with that. Like, I would understand. But
well, so did God.
That was, yes, he did.
Many times.
But it's one of those, like, we know that they were following God. You know, they're so early into it. It's kind of like we're very set. You know, we have the Bible to be able to go back to. Like, they're just going off of what mom and dad told me.
I think it is easier for us to trust than it would have been for them.
Yeah.
Because it was so
if we would, go back and with our mindset back then, we'd be able to, jump in line and go ahead. But, I know this isn't quite following, but like on the second coming of Christ, how hard is it going to be to believe that second is the second coming of Christ, So that's kind of where I was like, I kind of felt bad for him at the same time, but like they've seen all this stuff that's proven there's a God. Like I would trade with them any day to be able to see what they've been able to see. And so that's kind of where I'm going back to that. But yeah, clearly it's like Bugs Bunny, or not Bugs Bunny, is it the coyote falling off the cliff, and their attitude kind of just gets to the point of believing whatever they want to believe and going from there. So yeah,
I think I had 2 thoughts. For one, we are in a culture where a lot of atheists say, I want to see something, I want to see a miracle in order to believe it. Yet we see, for these folks, Bible's right here. They see the miracle. They receive the benefits of several miracles. They get to see the pillar of fire and the cloud, which reveals that God is present right there. And yet, over and over and over again, they continue to fail and to fall. And of course, that question, is God with us or not?
Yeah.
He's right there. Is he doing anything for us? He's providing you food. You don't have to farm. You don't have to hunt. You don't have to ask for directions on where to go. I mean, for most, in the ancient world, pretty much everything's being handed to them.
Yeah.
Yet, even though they see the miracle and receive the benefit, they are still, struggling to put their full faith and trust
it's
in God.
kind of, one of the words I put down was dependent. So they were definitely dependent on God. And it's like our society, our culture now doesn't want to be dependent on anybody, which is what's harming us because we're not dependent on God and leaving it up to Him to better us or take care of us. We want to do it ourselves. Yet they truly did want to be dependent, but yet they weren't. I mean, they wanted to depend on Him, but yet they were not trusting of Him. And then we're kind of trusting, but yet we don't want to give Him that. Let Him for us to be dependent on Him.
It reminds me of a kid at Christmas that got everything but that one thing, and that's the one thing they're stuck on. So they didn't get that one thing. They got everything
Still
else on the
everything,
list.
yeah.
Yep.
Being grateful and thankful. When you were saying that, that's the first thing that clicked in my mind.
Yep. Right.
All right,
Number
ready?
5.
Yep.
When the 10 spies report that Israel can't take the land, Israel believes them instead of God. Then God promises a consequence for their sins. Essentially, they will get exactly what they believed and asked for. They won't get to dwell in the land, and they'll die in the desert instead. When God tells them this, they try to take the land. What seems to be motivating their actions? Are they suddenly faith-filled, or are they repentant, fearful?
It reminded me of the age-old question, is it better to be loved or feared? And of course, I think that's the situation that they find themselves in here. That God wants them to follow because they love Him, not because they're afraid of the consequences. I mean, we can look at this perspective of a parent. Do we want our mother or our father? Do we want to be afraid of them, and that's why we obey them, or do we obey them because we love them?
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're growing up, there's a little bit of both.
Yeah. For sure.
Don't make me count to 3.
Yeah. Or just start counting.
Yep.
I pretty much had that they were more fearful of their foes than the faith they had in God. And then once they realized that was taken away from them, it was like, oh, okay, let's go take this. And it's like, no, you've already made your decision. You've already, let's get walking pretty much. And
Here's another 38 years of all this.
yeah.
Oh, no.
Yep. So,
Yeah, that's pretty much how I responded to. It was just, and you just go, God.
Oh, goodness. Number 6. Korah leads 250 people in a rebellion against Moses. Ultimately, why are they rebelling?
I just really put that more than anything, they're rebelling against God, not really Moses. He chose Moses to be the leader of Israel, and they were trying to make their own way with that by overrunning him with their rebellion. So it really wasn't Moses they were rebelling against. It was really more rebelling against God and his decisions. So,
And I commented they were trying to avoid the 38 years of consequences that they knew they were.
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things. It's already bad.
Mm-hmm.
We probably can't make it much more
Yeah.
worse. Let's just
Yeah.
rebel. I
Yeah.
mean, we got 38 years to look forward to anyway, so
The majority of them have already been told they're not making
they're not
it.
going to make it.
So
So
it's
it's
pretty
kinda
much
like,
30.
Why not?
Well, I'm going to read the section here, the initial complaint. This is what Korah says. You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation? Seems like they're suffering from the same problem Aaron and Miriam had
Yeah.
earlier. And that's where I think this is going to be a tough saying. And this does happen in churches. Sometimes the problem in a church is not the pastor, it's the congregation.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about Burlington. Definitely not talking about Burlington. But in the Methodist Church, you get to hear about the churches that chew up and spit pastors out. Mm-hmm. And they can be high quality people who are trying to do all the right things, yet it's the people who are just a pain in the butt.
Yeah. Sandpaper people.
The sandpaper people. And so I think that sometimes we forget that, it's God who selects, who he elevates, because Moses' response was like, yeah, well, let's ask God. And of course, and all sorts of consequences fall on Korah and his crew. And so I think that's why it's so important for people to understand, especially for pastors and leaders, that we are judged to a higher standard, but also that into a reasonable sense, people need to then respect the people God who has lifted up. Now, if the leader or pastor does something wrong, they must be held accountable, and in a lot of cases that gets forgotten. And so I think we see here the need to understand that we are ultimately obeying God, not blindly following a pastor, and we can't just show up against the person God has called to lead the people. And so
we still remain in a broken world that people are just going to make.
And so that's where I appreciate was G.K. Chesterton when he was asked to respond to the question, what is wrong with the world? And he says, and his response is, I am. To realize that, to look at ourselves, I'm the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Number 7. Moses rebels against God by striking the rock in front of all the people instead of speaking to it as God commanded. As a result, he does not get to enter the promised land. Why do you think Moses is held to a higher standard with his obedience? Is there something else that might also factor in here? See Numbers chapter 14, 29 through 35 if you need help. This one was hard for me to answer, and so I didn't answer because I almost thought it was more he was holding Moses to a higher standard. Moses is very obedient throughout all of that, but he also did exactly the opposite of what God told him to do. So I understand both sides of it. It was just hard for me to answer that in a response.
Well, being held to the higher standard to me is because God chose Moses, and just kind of like you expect sometimes when you're coaching a baseball or a softball team and your daughter or son is playing on that, you expect more out of them than you would anybody else.
That's true.
Sometimes it's because it's a reflection on you.
So, slightly different opinion than what she has. I don't necessarily think it's totally about the rock. I was trying to pull it up.
What part's totally about the rock?
I don't think it's totally about the rock.
Yeah.
About the fact they struck the rock. Because God did not command it. For a while, I thought, he broke, God's command. God didn't say anything about striking no rock.
Yeah.
But Ray Vander Laan, in one of his lessons, goes into some of the nuance of what Moses and Aaron's response, because in that encounter, in that action, it's Moses who hits the rock, not Aaron, but yet they're both are punished, that they can't go into the promised land. And so something about them, and so when you see in Moses's words, how, he says me and Aaron. So from what when I read in there, then after listening to Ray Vander Laan, is that Moses and Aaron are talking amongst themselves, just getting themselves amped up and frustrated on these people who are being just jerks to them. Yeah. But what Ray Vander Laan points out is that word rebels, or however it's translated in a different translation, the Hebrew word there is mara. And that word Mara is the same word to describe one of the first waters when they left Egypt was called Mara. And Mara is a word that means bitter or worthless. And so think of it this way. Moses says, you worthless people, thwack, out of anger. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, what Vander Laan points out, he says, God's response in essence is, that is not how you treat my people. You don't call them worthless. You are to be a leader of, like a shepherd, a voice, not like Pharaoh who used stick, because the stick was a symbol of Pharaoh's power. And so for Moses to take that staff and to smack the rock, Moses and Aaron made it about them. And so, and then of course thinking, basically these people are worthless after Moses over and over again say, please have mercy.
Yeah.
He was probably at his
true.
breaking point. And again, I think it goes to what I said in the earlier question, sometimes the problem is the people.
Yeah.
And that's where I got interested in culture in my doctorate, because I was like, okay, how can we pivot, culture that may be unhealthy? But back to the original point, I think for the rebellion, Moses, or not the rebellion, but striking the rock, Moses lost himself in a moment to where then he basically wrote off the people out of his anger, and then so not entering the promised land was part of that consequence.
That makes more sense.
That's right. I enjoyed Ray Bondelon's lesson, because I was like, oh, it makes a lot more sense than just hitting a rock with a stick.
Yeah.
When the fact that there's anger behind it, and then the we approach from him and Aaron, since Aaron's part of is included
I'm
in the
bringing
consequence.
you along with me.
Yeah.
You feel the same way.
But
Yeah.
sometimes you sit in a leaders meeting, it's like, man, these people are driving me nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course you feed into each other, and now you got an echo chamber, and then you get yourself excited, just like the crowd, and you're just like, you jerks.
Sure.
So.
All right.
Anyways, that was my thing. Anybody else have anything to say?
Nope. Like I said, I really didn't have an answer because I could see both sides.
Is it 8?
Yep.
Okay. What do you think motivates, is that Balaam?
Balaam.
Balaam in his actions toward Israel and King Balak?
Okay, I have clarifications first. I got to make sure I'm. Balaam was like the wizard was the first one that came to mind, but magician is I think what she used, right? And then King Balak was the one that hired him to go put the curse on him. Correct? Okay.
Yeah.
I put really Balaam was just motivated by money.
Money and power.
Like
Well, and here's what's interesting is that in the opening part of the sequence, Balaam's like, let me see what the Lord says. And of course, God answers, and he says, well, God says I can't. So see you later. And of course, comes back, and then God says, go with them, but you're going to say exactly what I said. And of course, then we get the journey with his donkey, and God's frustrated with him. So I think part of it, on the ride, Balaam could have been like, even though we do what God says, the money ain't that bad.
Yeah.
And so that's then it could be a foothold to be like, well, since he's paying me a lot of money to do this, I'll do what I
trying to
want.
look into everything.
And so I don't necessarily think God was angry in a sense, but I think it was an intervention of correction to make sure that his mindset stayed to where it was supposed to be as it was in the beginning. But that's just my interpretation.
You had anything to add there?
Nope.
Okay.
All right, off to the God shot.
We did actually talk before this one.
Yeah, we talked before, make sure. And so mine was day 59. Oh, not day 59, sorry. Day 61. Gotta use my bookmark.
Yeah.
So I'll read it here. When Aaron takes the incense and stands between the living and the dead, appealing for God's mercy, it's risky for him. As the high priest, he isn't supposed to be near dead bodies at all. He could be struck dead. But he risks his life to stop the plague and save people from death through his offering to God. This shows us a picture of Jesus, our great high priest, who intervened, not just risking death, but facing it and defeating it on our behalf. His death makes us alive. He is where the joy is. Amen to that.
Yep.
And again, if we are following the footsteps of Jesus, think about how can we put ourselves in. Are there situations where God may call us to stand between life and death?
Yeah,
That would be tough. I think about some of those like priests and pastors who, during wartime try to stand between troops, or during the protests, priests are in the middle of the street praying between the police and the protesters. I'm like, will I be called to step in that situation? Because you could get shot, you can get a rock, you can get all sorts of stuff happen to you.
Yeah.
So that takes faith.
I've always been a big, not a big superhero guy. Like I like superhero movies, but to me, like a real superhero, someone that gave up their life, but has disregard for their own life to help someone else. I just think of Peyton Hillis, who is a former NFL running back, was on vacation in Florida. His kids got ripped up in a riptide. He said there was no thought to it. I went to save my kids. It gave me the chills again. And, things like that, the movies where, can't think of the title of the movie. One of my grandma's favorite movies, it was a little person who he was trying to go to high school. He was going on a bus. It was wintertime. Bunch of elementary school kids are on this bus with him. It gets pushed into a lake. He goes and brings each kid, swims back and forth, saves them all, and then on the last one, he gets them off, and then he ends up drowning in the bus. Like things like that when people give, whenever I think of a true superhero, like that's what I think of, and that's honestly what Jesus was for us. He gave himself, literally died for us on the cross to be able to make it better people. So with that, 61 was mine as well, but I had another one, so I picked day 59, so I'll go ahead and read it here. It's beautiful to see the three distinct persons of our one unified God, all represented in the camp in various ways. God the Father dwelling in the most holy place, God the Spirit resting on Moses's and the others he chooses, and likely but not certain, God the Son appears in the pillar of the cloud and fire. Even in the midst of people's grumbling, God is with them, and he is where the joy is. They're truly giving God not unforgiving, but endlessly forgives us for our mistakes. And again, giving us the Holy Land, giving his people the Holy Land, even though it seems like every day they're, bashing him on something. So, that was
God's loved but sandpaper people.
Yeah, for sure.
Mine was day 60. After the rebellion, God could have come out swinging, but he opens with, when you come into the land you are to inhabit, which I am giving you. Despite all their sin, he reminds them that he hasn't changed his mind. He keeps his promise. They're still his people. What mercy, what integrity, what forgiveness. Even in the desert for 40 years, he's where the joy is. Yeah. And I think for me, the desert in today's terms could be a lot of things that we're going through that we feel like we've been in that desert for a long time, but he continues to be there, even when it's not pleasant.
Yep.
So he doesn't leave us, and that's comforting.
Yep.
So
all right. Well, thank you guys again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our time together again. And so next week
I didn't even look.
Yeah. I had it memorized earlier today. So if you stay with us, of course, we'll start off with Numbers 23, finishing the book of Numbers at chapter 36, and Deuteronomy chapters 1 and 2. So, as I just said, we're going to finish the book of Numbers and then the first two chapters of the book of Deuteronomy. No Psalm passage, at least for the next couple of weeks.
Not till week 12.
Not till week 12. So, all right. Thank you again. Yeah. Take care, and God bless.
Have a good week, everyone.